Star Trek Deep Space Nine Millennium, Book 1, The Fall of Terok Nor, Chapter 10. The only thing worse than a Ferengi with a headache was a Ferengi with an earache. And at this moment, in this darkened bar in the middle of DS9's night, Quark suffered from both. Unquestionably, the aftermath of the past 8 hours he had spent with Odo. And now his woes intensified as he saw the after-hours condition of his establishment. The chairs had not been placed on top of the tables. There were still glasses on the Dabo table, and behind the bar, the replicator had been left on. "Why do I even bother?" Quark said to the empty room. He gazed up at the vivid orange, red, and yellow stained glass mural that dominated the first floor of his bar. All its back-glow panels had been left on, too. "What about you, Admiral? Do you have an answer?" The mural kept its silence, which was no great surprise. Quark shuffled over to the bar to pour himself a very large drink. Exactly what the mural was, Quark really wasn't sure. For years, that same wall had been dominated by a large Cardassian galore, courtesy of Gul Dukat. Quark seldom cared about politics, and if the Commandant of Terok Nor had wanted his grandmother hung on the wall, it would have been fine with the Ferengi. So the lurid green, pink, and yellow symbol of the Cardassian Union, which looked to Quark like some improbable combination of the hooded, smiling partner of Ferengi legend and a short-handled screwdriver, had remained proudly in place, until Gul Dukat had swaggered in one day to announce that he had just won a spectacular work of rare and valuable art in a late-night game of Tongo. And since Quark's was the only public facility on the station with a ceiling high enough to properly display this great treasure, Dukat proclaimed Quark's would be its new home. At the time, Quark had cared as much about his establishment's decor as he did about politics. His was the only bar in the Cardassian half of the station. Indeed, it was the only bar in the entire station, the closest thing to competition being the Cardassian Cafe. And if a tired Cardassian soldier or Bajoran trustee would rather eat replicated Cardassian Nemuk without the benefit of Kanar to wash it down, or the company of luscious Dabo girls, then Quark was just as happy not to have those lackluster, boring slugs taking up valuable space in his bar. So, Cardassian galore or Dukat's esteemed art treasure, it mattered little to Quark at the time what was on the back wall of his bar. True, he had had to shut down for 2 days while a team of Bajoran artisans were brought up to install the mural, and Sub-Commandant Akris had not granted Quark's request for a matching percentage decrease in the weekly kickback. That is, licensing fee that Quark had to pay to the station management office. But Dukat had more than made up for Quark's initial lost profits by pretentiously buying endless rounds for his staff on the night the mural was grandly unveiled, to mostly diffident, though polite applause. As Quark had worked the tables that night, he had overheard the Bajoran comfort women saying that at least the orange light helped bring a more Bajoran flush to the cold, gray faces of the Cardassian officers they were forced to entertain. Quark himself liked the orange light, because it made it easier to use short measures in amber-colored drinks. And Dukat got to proudly trumpet on about the addition he had made to culture on Terok Nor, making the station an uplifting beacon of Cardassian light amidst the primitive darkness of the Bajoran sector. It was just that no one seemed to be sure what the mural was supposed to represent, until finally, that first night, when much Kanar had been consumed and 2 Glins had already been dragged off to the infirmary after a particularly brutish fight, which fortunately had lasted long enough for Quark to take bets and clear 5 slips of latinum, Dukat toasted the mural in such a way that it was clear what he thought it was. "To a mighty enemy," Dukat had proclaimed. "Defeated at last, now sentenced to look upon the works of the Cardassian Union and despair. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the portrait of Admiral Arkeen, late of the Tholian Assembly." After Dukat and his guests had left for the evening, Quark and Rom and two Cardassian mining engineers had closed up the place, leaning on the bar, staring thoughtfully up at what was now called the Tholian mural. One mining engineer drunkenly offered up the observation that Tholians had faceted heads. The other, in an equal state of disequilibrium, disagreed, maintaining it was the Tholian helmets that were faceted, and that the shape of Tholian heads was closer to the long and pointed sections included in the mural, except that he was positive the mural had been installed upside down. Rom had volunteered that he was fairly certain the mural was actually a version of the traditional good luck banners that were always hung over the drinking troughs and what he delicately referred to as Tellarite mud pits of ill repute. Yep. They make them by the hundreds on Tellaris, Rom had sniggered. And you see that same crazy design on Tellarite scarves and pillboxes and lingerie. Quark remembered glaring at his idiot brother, demanding to know why the Tellarites would put a portrait of a Tholian admiral on lingerie. Rom had simply shrugged and gone on to explain in excruciatingly precise and clinical detail that the shape of the mural was not that of a Tholian head at all, but of an entirely different, but equally remarkable, part of a Tellarite male anatomy. Even as he began to laugh at Rom's hilariously ribald description, Quark had felt his heart actually stop beating as he suddenly remembered the presence of the two Cardassian engineers. Fortunately, both were so drunk they didn't hear Rom dismiss the gull's great work of art as nothing more than a big Tellarite. Well, even in private, Quark had not been able to say the word, though he relished the aptness of the image. For at least a year after that, he and Rom had shared a rare moment of rapport in their guilty, private pleasure every time Dukat came to the bar with whoever his latest comfort woman was, and regaled her with the story of Admiral Keen, ending with a grandiloquent toast and a salute to the mural. Only Quark and his brother knew to what the gull was actually raising his glass, and they kept that knowledge to themselves. And if any other visitors to Quark's during those last years of the occupation recognized what was hanging on the wall for what it was, they also wisely kept their expert knowledge, and their laughter, to themselves. Sorry, but I couldn't resist. If you'll pardon the indulgence in reading a few pages out of a book, but yes, at least in the novel verse, that is what that is. Cheers.